Welcome to Legal Insights, DEI for Real, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, where we seek to reassure, educate, activate you, and give you leadership tips. I am Chris Jones. Move my slide. There I am. Chris Jones, Spectra Diversity. We have the only statistically validated assessment, workplace culture assessment that measures the organization and the individuals in the same survey. Takes about 10 minutes. Please contact me for more information. And my partner today is Nance Schick.
Hi, I'm Nance Schick of Third Ear Conflict Resolution. I am a New York employment attorney and global workplace mediator. And we've been doing this series a good portion of the year at this point, trying to help you navigate all the changes in workplaces. And they just keep coming. So I hope you'll keep coming and we can help you navigate some of this a little bit better.
Okay, thank you. And let's start with the reassure part. And I think, let me see how many people we have. I'm just gonna skip this. But I have been fired. I was fired unjustly. I've been laid off. I've been laid off and fired. I had to fire someone. I will answer this for myself. I have been fired. And I was fired unjustly. And when we get to those scenarios, I will fill you in on my employment woes.
And I can tell you that I have been fired unjustly, sued my prior employer, won a judgment that I never collected on, was never able to because they fled the country. And I've also had to terminate employees. So obviously I've been in this as employee, employer, and then as lawyer and also arbitrator, mediator. So I've seen this from a lot of angles.
Yeah, no kidding. Just some level setting a little bit. 1.6 million workers are laid off each year. Oh, no, each month, totaling 19.2 million per year. The number of federal employees laid off, this is 300,000 by DOGE, that's Elon Musk's effort, and then 4,200 during the current shutdown. So that's in the last, what's it been, 3 weeks, I think?
Yeah.
The federal government is only 1.8% of workers. So even though it's a large percent of the federal workforce, it's not a large share of workers in general. And here are the top 5 reasons for being fired. Absenteeism. This is, occurring over and over and over again. No call, no show. That is when you are absent and you didn't even let them know. Conflict with management. We'll talk more about that. Misconduct. And what is misconduct? What is perceived misconduct? What you think it is, what they think it is. That's a whole nother ball of wax. And then policy violations. And that's where we'll get into some of the things that really apply to DEI. So educate. And this is take it away, Nancy. This is one definition. An employer fires an employee in violation of the law or an employment contract. So I will share with you my wrongful termination. 2 of them happened right after I graduated from college, and I wasn't yet working in my field. The first one is I was a receptionist for a company that made fasteners like stud bolts and thunderbolts and things like that. It was all men with 2 exceptions, me as the receptionist and a woman who was in sales. I had passed my probationary period, so I was past the 3 months. They were talking about, because I was so wonderful, they were going to give me new duties and it was all great. Well, the next day, I think, the salesperson told them that they could take all their work, all their contacts and just shove them up to their, what. And they came in that afternoon and fired me. And they
Mm.
said they fired me because, and I quote, "We can't trust your kind." So my kind being female. Um, and I was ignorant. I didn't know what to do. So, and I got another job. My next job was waiting tables. And I was it happened to be a union restaurant. I'm waiting tables. I'm in the kitchen picking up food or doing something. And my table, one of my tables left. They did a dine and dash.
Mm.
And my manager said, "Well, you'll have to pay for that." And I said, "I don't think that's fair. I can't pay for people that leave. They're the criminal, not me." And in that case, because I was union, I talked to the union, and they made me so I didn't have to pay that uh, tab for that table. So the union stuck up for me, and I was glad about that.
And
Those are,
and one thing I'll note on that is I know that was a little while ago and early in my career, it was a lot more of that. Definitely in New York and probably a lot of other states at this point, you cannot make an employee pay for something like that. The same thing if they even break something at work. We don't allow in most cases, definitely in New York, we're not going to allow an employer to pass that expense onto the employee. It's considered the cost of doing business.
yeah. And if I
So
knew what I
yay,
knew,
some advancement.
if I knew what I know now, I would have done it differently. So wrongful termination, um, discriminatory, whistleblowing. So, and we did talk about whistleblowing in a previous session, but this is basically the definition: someone who reports waste, fraud, abuse, corruption, dangers to public health and safety to someone who is in the position to rectify the wrongdoing. So you talk to your boss, you talk to the government, you talk to a police officer, who can you talk to
Yep,
if
you
you're a
can talk.
whistleblower?
Yeah, as a whistleblower, it's really going to depend on what you're reporting. I'll give an example that just came up, I think, in the past maybe 24 hours with a colleague who, doesn't do this area of work, but it was a doctor in a hospital setting, and the doctor noticed, for example, that the PA, the physician's assistant, was doing a lot of the types of work that you require a medical license, right? A doctor's license, you have to be an MD to perform certain things, or maybe you have to be a radiologist to operate certain equipment. There are certain rules there, and he reported originally to the hospital that, hey, this shouldn't be going on. And then he got reprimanded and they didn't do anything. And so we said, really what we needed him to do now is to make sure that he was reporting it to the Department of Health in his state and taking it up that chain, because it looks like the hospital's not going to do much about that. And in a lot of these cases, what we see is then the employer starts to retaliate against the person that reported. That's why we have these whistleblower laws now to protect you. But it's really going to depend on what type of dangerous activity. If it is something that's public health related, of course, you try to resolve it internally, but sometimes you're going to just need to take it right outside to your state or to the federal government. And that includes things like OSHA, right? Safety violations there. You may want to report to OSHA. I'm a fan of giving your employer an opportunity to correct the issue, but not everybody's going to do that. And I think we've talked about this a lot over the past several months. There's a lot of attitude around regulation right now that says, nah, who's going to enforce it? And I think that's where we're in this quandary of how do you work around it. But the one thing that might bring some security in this is that even if you can't get your employer or even the government to take action quickly enough, you still have lawsuits available to you. That hasn't changed.
That reminds me of, I had a contract, with a company that, to do, script writing and video production. And this company was using, Michael Jackson songs, and they were editing, pictures to it. And they gave that as an example of the good work that they were doing when I first came on board. And I said, you can't do that. That's a copyright violation. That's an obvious copyright violation. And they said, we don't care. We have rooms full of lawyers.
Mhm.
And at which point I said, well, I won't do it. And I didn't pass it up the chain, but I just made it known that I wasn't going to do it. So there.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
that
probably kind of a wimpy response, but that's what I did.
yeah, and everybody
So,
has a different way of handling it. And that's one of the reasons we've advised in the case that I was just talking about, we've said that doctor needs to both talk to someone who has whistleblower experience, maybe under the False Claims Act, which is where this came up with, in the prior webinar was around the False Claims Act, but also the employment lawyer that might be able to help protect that person's job afterwards, right? So it's a multi-layered issue. And I think having sometimes legal counsel to guide you is very helpful, which gives me an opportunity to just say, I'm not looking for that work for myself. First of all, this is general information, just trying to help guide you a little bit. But it's also something to let you know that there are lawyers out there that will do free consultations. And the way that most what we call plaintiffs lawyers, right? These are people that protect the workers in these situations. They're the ones that help the worker file a claim if they need to. They will usually do a free consultation, and then the way they get paid is on contingency, meaning that they get paid contingent upon whether they can help you get money from your lawsuit, and then they take a percentage of it. And that is intended to have people actually report. So if you didn't know that those existed, it's a really important thing to understand that you do have access to justice, as we call it, if you can find a plaintiff's attorney that will do that free consultation for you. And it takes a little bit of work, but a good portion of them, if you search for plaintiff's employment attorney, a lot of them will help you navigate the scenario. And then if you do have to file a lawsuit, they'll help you with that.
and they want to take good cases. They want to take a case that they think is a good, solid one, because that's where the contingency would come in. They'd get paid for it.
Exactly. But a lot of people
So,
won't report because they think they have to pay an attorney a retainer up front, and that's not
right,
true.
that's not how it works. Okay, activate what you can do. Here's some options after you've been fired. Unemployment benefits, review your severance, update
Yeah,
your
and
resume
one
and
of the
start job
notes
hunting.
there is severance is not mandatory. That sometimes comes as a surprise to people because they're used to hearing maybe that their family members got severance or their friends got severance, but it is not mandatory. The exceptions to that are maybe if you have a union contract or you have some sort of employment agreement. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still take a look if they offer you a severance agreement and look at what kind of leverage you have to ask for more. The purpose of that severance agreement is typically the employer is kind of buying out your agreement not to sue them. So if you have, for example, like Chris, the earlier case you had, if your employer had offered you a severance agreement, you might have said, well, let me go look and talk to an attorney to make sure that the severance I'm being offered is fair based on the fact that I now know I've been discriminated against, right? Because they're going to ask for that waiver of your claims, right? That's what they're buying. They're not just giving it to you because they feel bad that they let you go, right? That's not what it's about. It's an exchange. You know, most of this is about a mutually beneficial exchange. They want your waiver and they want to try and control how much they might have to pay for any wrongdoing they did. But the other thing you need to know with severance, and this is something I explain when I'm reviewing the agreements, is not all claims, especially in New York, are waivable. So there are certain things that it'll say all claims known now are not known. But if you discover, for example, that you've been working on a job site that has asbestos and you learn later that you've got asbestos from that job, that's not a waivable claim. You could still file a workers' comp claim.
Okay, and know your rights. What rights does someone have after being fired?
Well, the first thing to know is that of course, you may have a legally actionable wrongful termination, but not all termination that feels wrong is legally actionable. And what I mean by that is we're really looking then for, was there some sort of discrimination? Was it unlawful discrimination? Was there some sort of retaliation for a whistleblower complaint or something along those lines? That's what we're looking for when we're talking about legal actionability, right? So after that, it's knowing what your rights are to unemployment benefits. It varies state to state. And so that sometimes gets a little bit sticky. But there are also things that you might want to look into. For example, if you're an independent contractor and your contract has been canceled, maybe you want to look at whether it's more than a breach of contract. It might be that they've also misclassified you and you shouldn't have been an independent contractor in the first place. If that's the case, then you might have a legally actionable claim as an employee who was denied things like overtime, sick pay, workers' compensation, disability, paid family leave, and all of the other things in your state that would apply to employee benefits.
Um, Minnesota is a right to work state, which I think should be called the right to fire you. Are many states right to work states?
I'm not as familiar because I don't do a lot of union type work at this stage in my career. So I'm not as up on who is right to work and who's not. I think it's more common than not that states are not right to work. So what that really means is you have a right to decide not to be in the union if you're in a union job, that you have a right to opt out of it so that you can continue working. And that's a little bit different from at-will employment. And some people kind of collapse those two. So unless you're talking about a union situation, um, the right to work state doesn't
Yeah,
apply to you. I don't know if
okay.
that
And
helps.
maybe what I was meaning was an at will.
Okay, so then in that
Yeah,
situation, yes, most states are at-will states. I don't know of
okay.
anybody that's not, but that doesn't mean there's not one. I'm only licensed in New York.
Okay, I'm going to show you, this is termination, and this is just a little clip. I'm not going to show all of it, but this is from Up in the Air.
Oh, I'm not getting any sound, Chris.
Oh,
For over 10 years, and this is the way you treat me.
There we go.
Sleep at night. Oh.
How's your family? They sleeping well at night? Electricity still on? Heat still on? Refrigerator full of food? Gas tank full of gas?
And there's closed captions.
Yeah, or something? Not me. No, my kids, we're not gonna do anything.
This is what I get in return for 30 years of service for my company. And they send some yo-yo like you in here to try to tell me that I'm out of a job. They should be telling you you're out of a job.
You have a lot of gall coming in here and firing your #1 producer, and then you're gonna go home tomorrow and make more money than you've ever made in your life, and I'm gonna go home without a paycheck. Fuck you.
I guess you leave me dumbfounded. I don't know where this is coming from. How am I supposed to go back as a man and explain this to my wife that I lost my job?
I can't afford to be unemployed. I have a house payment. I have children. I don't know how you can live with yourself, but I'm sure that you'll find a way while the rest of us are suffering.
So it goes on, but basically the point of that is that laying someone off, terminating someone can be emotional. And Nancy, you said you've had to do it. I have not, but here we've got some before, during, and after termination tips.
Yeah.
Comment on the before ones.
I'm sorry. What did you say?
Do you have a comment on any of the before termination tips?
Yeah, I think before the termination, I think we have to, like, let's be honest here. Even in the Up in the Air movie, if you all haven't seen it, it's from several years back. I'm not going to date myself too much by saying how far back, but one of the things in this that I don't think people really talk about is the reason that it's hard to terminate another employee is I think employers know at a certain level, no matter how big or small your employment setting is, leadership knows that if they're having to lay people off, it's because they took some calculated risks that didn't pay off. And now they're not going to be the ones that take the fall for it. It's usually going to have to be somebody else that didn't have a lot of authority over the process. So I bring that up because if you are in a management setting, especially if you're in a C-suite or you're the small business owner, that's something you need to be thinking about is before you let someone go, yes, you want to know what your policies are. You want to consult legal counsel. But you also want to look at what kind of objective criteria are you measuring people by? And are you consistently training them, developing them, making sure they get what they need to do their job successfully? I talk a lot about employment being a mutually beneficial partnership, and what I see over and over in the employment setting that leads to lawsuits is that the employer changes the job description, adds things, maybe sometimes a whole nother job on top of the employee, doesn't train them for it. Sometimes they promote them right out the door, right? And because they're not really investing back in the employee, and then they're wondering why the employee is not delivering. So the first thing I would say before termination is make sure that you've properly set someone up for success. Now, if they didn't meet you halfway, that's a different story. If they're not coming in on time, they're calling out all the time, they're always missing deadlines, that's different. Or if they're causing disruption in the workplace by being mean or upsetting people or discriminating against them, those are all different. But I think you really have to look before you start laying people off. That's a term we call it a layoff at this point, and still, layoff usually means you're letting go of a substantial part of your workforce. It used to mean temporarily, and you might call them back. Like some of my clients are seasonal, and they're in Buffalo or Minnesota during the winter, right? And you're not going to be out necessarily on a construction site. So you get laid off, you get unemployment during that time. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about really terminating somebody's employment. Like, be straight with yourself. Stop making up fancy words to lessen the blow to make yourself feel better. You've taken somebody on, then it's up to you to make sure that they have what they need to succeed in employment the way that you want it done. So that's the first thing, is make sure you've done all of that, because if you haven't, that's also when you're likely to have somebody raise discrimination, because you have not done the analysis to make sure you're not discriminating, right? And I'm guessing, Chris, with you measuring, you probably see opportunities all the time to kind of cut off those potential lawsuits, those bad business decisions, those adverse employment actions, right?
Yeah, when I look at the data, I can see exactly what segments of an employee population are really unhappy with management. And if management were to fire people, it might be them. It might be those same people.
Yeah.
Unless they have, objective criteria, like you said.
Right. And that was one of the things that made the termination. So we're kind of moving to during termination, is because I was able to measure exactly what needed to be addressed, like what was not going well in our work situation. I sat down with two of my employees this way, and I learned how to be a better employer at this. As I said, here's your performance. Here's what you've been doing. Here's what you haven't been doing. Here's what I've been paying you to do. Here's what you haven't been getting done. Can you, looking at all of this, tell me that you're actually doing a good job and that you're satisfied, you feel like you're meeting your obligation? Both of them admitted that no. And what it came out in that conversation, because I wasn't, I was frustrated, but I didn't dislike them, and I didn't need to disparage them, right? I just needed to say, hey, the work's not getting done. And both of them said, I don't really like the work, so I'm probably not going to work really hard to get it done. And that was, I'm
Maybe this isn't a good fit.
Well, and that was really what happened. And so, that's why I share those stories, is because I'm still friendly with both of these people. And part of that was because we recognized that we liked each other, but they hated working with me. Like, not like they liked me, I liked them. They hated the work I do. Right? They didn't want to work in a law firm. They thought it was going to be different from what it was, right? Because they don't show you on TV all the really boring things that lawyers have to do to put forth the case before we go into the courtroom, which is where all the glam occurs, right? And so it was, we kind of laughed about it at that point, and I said, well, how about this? How about you help me find somebody to replace you? And in turn, I will help you maybe find another job in some way. Like, tell me what you want to do. Maybe I know somebody that's looking for something in that realm, right? But that was the way that I approached it, as partnership, instead of just being, oh, you're a number, you're not a person, I don't care, get the job done or you're out. So obviously, that can't happen at the same level when you're a larger employer, but you can have something similar where you are communicating with empathy and professionalism. I wasn't planning on having a termination conversation with either of them when I went in to show them, here's where you are and here's what's not getting done. I was hoping to, maybe do what some would call a performance improvement plan, right? And they both said, this isn't really working out. That's okay too. I would much rather know than have them limping along and causing me harm by not getting the work done, right? So I went in with that, just looking to kind of rehabilitate their performance. But if you know you're going in and you're going to have to terminate an employee, one of the things I tell people as a lawyer is limit how much you say at that point. When you're delivering the news of we're terminating your employment, it's not going to be comfortable no matter what you do, right? By then, the employee should know because, as we said, you've already talked to them before termination about them not getting it done. What do you need? Providing them with what they need if you can. And if they're still not getting it done, it shouldn't be a surprise, right, that they're not performing well. If it comes out of the blue, that's usually when I say, again, if it feels like they had no warning and just lost their job for no reason, nobody ever talked to them about their attendance or their performance or anything like that, then that you're probably going to get a complaint over that one. But if you've communicated already and then they're just not meeting the performance expectations, then you go to them and you say, hey, we've been talking about this for a while and you're still not doing it. And so today is going to be your last day, right? And say, I'm sorry, I wish you well, we tried, but this just isn't working out.
One
And
of the
then
things,
stop.
yeah,
And then
one
just
of the
stop
things that we
and go to
talked,
logistics.
yeah, one of the things that we talked about in the hiring process is to have have more than one person there so that there's more than one set of ears, and to have some sort of a matrix and set questions, so that you're not asking one person something and then the next person something else. Is there a similar process for the termination, like a matrix that you would
I
follow if
wouldn't
you need to?
I wouldn't go so complex at that point when it's termination. There's already been a decision. It's not a negotiation. The negotiation should be occurring in that process
Before,
improvement, right? Once
right?
that decision to terminate has been made, just kind of rip the Band-Aid off. Be kind. Know that they're going to be upset. It's going to be painful. I have a blog post on my website about like, look, employee termination is a difficult and painful situation for both sides. There is nothing you can do that's going to make it easier. There is no perfect timing. People are like, well, when should I do it? What time of day? Which day of the week? It doesn't matter because you know what? Even when you pretty much know that you're not doing the best possible job or you're failing in your job, it still sucks to be told you're fired. Okay. So there's just no way around it. It's going to be an uncomfortable situation. So the best thing you can do is help the person avoid humiliation. So think about it more that way. Of at this point, they're going to get bad news. You want to do a few things like make sure that the area is secured in case they really get angry, right? You want to make sure you're protecting the people around you, but you also want to not humiliate the person. So if there's a way to do it when other people aren't going to notice, right? And then when people start asking afterwards, what happened? Where is Chris? Why isn't she at her desk? Say, Chris and I, Chris is no longer working with us, right? Or something like that. And then cut it off. Anything
Well,
beyond that is
yeah,
basically gossip.
yeah, that's where communicate with the remaining team. Um, and your guidance on that is short and sweet.
Right. Yep. And
What
and the
if
other
somebody,
thing, yeah, go ahead.
what if somebody wants to, well, I really miss Chris. Do you have her personal email where I can contact her?
Okay, first of all, respect their privacy, right? If somebody misses Chris, right, or the Chris being the phantom employee that's been terminated, and that person cares enough about Chris, there are plenty of ways to go find Chris, right? Do not do it as the employer. Because you have to remember that Chris's contact information is personally identifiable information that is protected under a lot of privacy laws. So that's another thing, right? And maybe, you don't want to know, right? Like maybe you just don't want to deal with anybody anymore. You don't know anybody's circumstance. So the tendency, and I do understand this as a mediator, as someone who's very humanistic and holistic, the tendency is to want to explain things, make sure everybody feels okay. Look, again, terminations suck. And I say it with that strong language because there is no way to make it feel better. You do the best you can, but it's still going to sting, and people are still going to feel weird about it, and they're going to have questions, but honor people's privacy and let them choose. If they want to talk about why they were terminated, then their coworkers can reach out to them. Again, plenty of ways to find them, and they can reach out to them and talk to them and see how they're doing. Take them to lunch, whatever. Refer them for another job, whatever you want to do to help, but do not do it as the employer, right? And don't try to get involved in that, because you will overstep, and there's a good chance you're gonna step right into a lawsuit.
Okay. We've got a few legal and DEI related resources. Project 2025 tracker. Overall progress is 48%. It's moving. And we'll
And
see
one thing
what,
I'll note on that, however, is that I haven't looked at the tracker to fully understand it, but something I will look into is that progress may not be permanent, right? That's another thing to remember, is there's still a lot of appeals going on. So although this is concerning, I think it's also something to remember. We still have other avenues. And I stress that this is not permanent, because the other thing that I'm here to say, reassure, educate, activate, and lead, right, is we don't want you giving up, right? That's the
no,
other
no, no,
thing. We
no.
don't want you giving up. Like, please still strive for for fairness and goodness and partnership in workplaces, right? It's still possible. It just might not look the way that we had hoped it would look in 2025.
Yep. And are there any questions? Please put them in the chat if you have any questions for Nancy or me. And if not, this is our next session, November 10th, segregation 2.0. And this is how policies divide work and education. So, and you had some, that came from you, Nancy. And do you want to give a little preview of that? What spurred that thought?
Yeah, I think probably this came up at one of our other sessions, right? Is that this is what we're dealing with at so many levels, is that I think maybe how I would clarify it, and we will a little bit more in the webinar, is it's the policies often say one thing, but it's the implementation of the policies and the consistency that can divide people at work and in higher education, is where a lot of this came from. And it's based on some cases that I've been working on, where with the intent of striving for things like DEI, unfortunately, some people have seen an opportunity to try and elevate themselves, and then what they end up doing is kind of causing other issues. And it's human nature is really what we're getting into, is that at the end of the day, the policy is only part of the issue, right? Like, you can pass laws all day long, but people don't always abide by them, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't need lawyers and courts, et cetera. And it's similar in workplaces, that you have to know for example, if your managers are treating other people differently, and it may look like they're using a policy, but does that policy conflict with another policy? So it really gets sticky, and that's what we've been seeing is these kind of hierarchies of protected classes, which we've seen then cases come out like the case this summer, which is completely escaping me.
Yeah.
Ames. There we go. I was like, I
Thank
taught a course
you.
on this.
Thank you. Thank
It's
you.
been a long day. I've been in court a lot more these past couple of weeks. So it's like, wait, which case was that? And that, so that, that's what's happening, unfortunately, is we have a tendency to think that once we implement a policy that everything it's going to fix everything, or we fight for a law to get passed, and then we think that's going to happen and it's all going to be fine. But at the end of the day, we're always dealing with human beings and our own human interests. And I was just having this conversation this morning with someone who I said, really what we're asking people to do to further the world, right? Like to come together, to have more equity, to have more equality, to have more fairness, is we're asking people to resist their natural human tendencies to put themselves first and to take the easiest possible path. So that's what we'll get into a little bit. I know that's a lot more philosophical than maybe we were expecting, but I think we have to explore how humans are causing the situations that we're seeing now and what do we do about it?
Yeah, and maybe by then I'll have my human rights certification done, and I'll be able to add some insight from that
Are you
course.
doing that with Lee Shull?
No, it's a different group,
Okay.
but probably similar.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've just started it. I'm learning a lot already, so hopefully I can share some of it. So
Yeah, and
thank you,
that'll be
Nancy.
good. We have some time to flesh that out. And for those of you that are still on, if you do have questions specific to your situation, I do always offer, again, the 15-minute assessment. I can't give legal advice unless it's in New York, and I don't do it in the assessment. What I do is I help you kind of figure out what your game plan is and take the next step. Sometimes that does mean a legal consultation. But a lot of times people just need that next step. Like, what do I do to protect myself? How do I protect my job? And one of the tips I'll give you is anytime, no matter what your role is, anytime you start to notice things that look a little off in your workplace, you want to start a log, right? Of date, time, location, other people that were there, and a quick sum and substance of what happened. So it might be, Chris was assigned to use copyrighted material in a presentation, and she said, she went to her boss and said, on Monday,
I will not do that.
right, at Monday at 10 a.m., she talked to her boss in her boss's office and said, this is a copyright violation. I don't think we should be doing this. And then you figure out from there. And then a lot of times people are like, well, what do I do next? And that's the kind of thing I can help you figure out. And look, I try to keep people in their jobs if possible, especially when they like their jobs.
Yeah, obviously. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Nancy. This concludes today's session. We'll
Yeah.
see you in a few weeks.
All right.
Okay, bye.
Bye.